Google stock is up 5% after beating on the top line and bottom line estimates. Some high-level takeaways: Google announced a $70 billion stock buyback plan and that their cloud unit was profitable for the first time in its history. As we mentioned last week, Sundar officially announced that DeepMind was merging with Brain. This is kind of controversial because it's really hard, according to some sources, for Sundar to get all his lieutenants to work together and row in the right direction. Google's Q1 search revenue up year over year, 2%, down 5% quarter over quarter. Just kind of to be expected because of seasonality and because we're in a down market right now, obviously with the recession. YouTube down 2.5% year over year, down 16% quarter over quarter. Other bets, which is like Nest and some other products, down 35% year over year. Net income, $15 billion. Any thoughts, Freeberg, on what is a mixed quarter by Google and I guess the wider macro environment?
What was so striking about the earnings call is not necessarily what was presented, but what was not presented, which was a stronger voice and a strategic plan going forward for dealing with two major issues at the company. One is the operating cost model, and the second is the AI strategy and the response to this evolution in AI. I've heard from a lot of folks that the AI strategy in particular, it's almost like Google already has this in the bag, but they just haven't kind of let it out of the bag. It's like they've got a Tasmanian devil and they're ready to go with it. And there's, from my read, an incredible amount of confidence that there's something that's going to happen and a set of things that are going to happen that are going to be very profound and powerful. I even heard some anecdotal stories about, hey, we don't have this feature in this product, but ChatGPT does. And then people basically showed up to this meeting and there was all this debate about, well, we can't let it out because we're not sure, the classic kind of like we're scared of doing wrong versus leaning forward and taking risk.
Don't be evil you're referencing?
No, it was just more about regulatory concern and getting things wrong and making a mistake. And so there's this total fear of regulatory and fear. So someone kind of slammed the table and said, let's just put it out. And the next day they put it out. So there's definitely a cultural change happening internally is what I've heard anecdotally. But what was really missing, which is what Wall Street needed to hear, what investors and shareholders needed to hear, is what's the strategy there? How are you going to compete? How are you going to resolve what's going to go forward? And secondly, what are you going to do about the cost structure of the company? Because everyone else, in contrast to Meta being up 11, 12% after hours with their cost cutting model and demonstrating that they're going to start pulling cash out of this business, Google's top story was, hey, we're stopped serving peanut M&Ms in the cafeteria or something ridiculous. And, that doesn't really address the real structural question. So I think the stock buyback, the $70 billion stock buyback, is an authorization to repurchase. It's not a plan to repurchase. So it's unclear if, when, or how that capital does actually get deployed in the market to buy back stock. And so there is also this big kind of shareholder sentiment of being let down, that there isn't an improvement in either cash coming out of the business or in cash being used in a smart way with the business. And it was the silence in the earnings call that I think really stunned a lot of people, which is why you didn't see a lot of stock movement, despite the actual business numbers being better than expected. And so there's a lot that Google, I think, still has to catch up to with respect to their peers, both on a product and strategy point of view, but also on a cost-cutting and a communication of that cost-cutting point of view to the market and to the street. Otherwise, shareholders are going to start to lose faith if they're not already, and are going to start to put their capital with other folks who they feel are better leading and leaning into this new evolution of technology, like Microsoft and Apple and Meta, which is really where those big capital allocators end up picking stuff to go. One final thing I'll say, it's extraordinarily important to note that I think Google has such an incredible AI advantage over Microsoft. And, Microsoft is almost solely dependent on OpenAI, this small startup company, and all of Bing Chat is powered by it. And Microsoft hasn't built out the infrastructure, the team, the rigor, the depth, the models that Google has. And Google made a few strategic blunders. They shouldn't have been as open with the transformer work that they did and shared that publicly. It certainly enabled OpenAI and others to compete. But Google certainly has an incredible set of tools and capabilities that is leap years ahead of Microsoft. They're in a position to really compete. They just have to have the will and the leadership to do it. slam the table, say, we're going to stop wasting money and we're going to start leading and driving this industry forward. And this could be a quick turnaround story for this stock and for this company. And I hope it'll happen.
Chamath, what are your thoughts on Google's leadership specifically? Is Sundar the right person to run the company going forward? Does he have the founder authority to get the ship and to get the lieutenants all kind of rowing in the same direction? Or does there need to be a leadership change, which is the big discussion of topic in Silicon Valley right now?
I think he's very capable. That's an amorphous organization of so many different competing interests. The thing that doesn't add up about the Google earnings release, but then also what Freeberg just mentioned, is there was this article that kind of tried to paint Sundar as sort of a caretaker CEO, right? Where Larry was the actual shadow CEO. Well, if that's true, Larry has more incentive than anybody else to kind of force change. And there was all these kind of like gripes and complaints that were articulated. And I don't put much stock in all of this stuff. I think that he is the right person for the job. And I think what they have to do is just do the simple, basic things. Like, it doesn't take a CEO change for a board of directors to have the emotional wherewithal to authorize a 15 or 20% reduction in force for a company that is so profitable, that clearly is not yet humming on all cylinders. And so you don't need to go through all of this drastic change to do these simple, obvious things. My takeaway across all of these four big companies is we are in a really unique moment to observe something that may sound controversial or hurt people's feelings that like these companies. But I think we're now well past peak big tech. Their valuations may still go up because they generate such an enormous amount of cash flow. But these are exactly those kinds of businesses now. They are X-growth, large cash flow businesses.
Blue chip, you might say?
Well, they were always blue chip, but the way that they grow is not through innovation. If you look at Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple, and ask yourself, when was the last hugely disruptive thing that they've created? You're hard-pressed to find something that was even done in the 2010s.
Yeah, actually, that's a good thought. I mean, the iPhone for Apple.
iPhone was 2007.
Yep.
Microsoft was in the 1990s. Google was in 1998 with core search. Maybe there was Maps and Gmail in the 2000s.
Chrome, Android. They bought some of that.
Facebook, it was the core service that we built in the 2000s, and then they acquired brilliantly, right? So I'm not saying that they didn't acquire well.
Yeah.
My point is that core organic innovation hasn't been there for a long time. So this is a moment to just be reflective of the fact that these are some incredible companies with ginormous cash flows. But now you've had this foundational platform shift, which exposes the fact that they really aren't good at innovating. And at times when they've tried to organically innovate, they've massively misallocated capital.
Oculus would be the example of that.
Either through a bloated balance sheet, so some would claim that Google overspends, or through just pure misallocation by starting projects that just are not large, but consume large amounts of cash. That would be the Facebook VR example. But in all of this, I think when you cut staff and expenses as a way to meet and beat, and top line growth is in the low single digits, it's an important moment to recognize that these companies have now transitioned to being cash cows. And if you look at sort of how financial markets value cash cows, they're very valuable, but it's not where you look for growth. And so in a world where rates eventually get cut and we start to come out of a recession, it tends to be that other people get rewarded.